Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of our critique of Star Trek Discovery. At the time of writing, production is on schedule, which probably means you're watching this in 6 months' time. 6 months and 3 days hence it'll have been pulled from YouTube based on a spurious and unjustified copyright claim from CBS. Before we begin, a word on that topic. For those of you who want to skip straight to the start of the critique, timestamps are in the description. However, if you're here for the premiere,
I'm sorry, it's kind of a ride.
Those of you who were with us when part 1 premiered will know that CBS yeeted it from our channel 2 days later. Those of you with us for our previous Star Trek video will know CBS yeeted that from our channel 3 days later. Those of you with us for the Trek video before that might remember that CBS yeeted that from our channel as well 2 days after it was published, and so on across, if memory serves, 5 or 6 videos in succession. The fact those 5 or 6 videos are all available now tells you something important about the merits of CBS's claims, which is that they were meritless. They've tried it on pretty much every single one of our Trek videos. We've not had this much trouble with any other studio, even the famously litigious ones, and every single time it has been overturned on review. Of course, they have around a month in which to judge any appeal, and as anyone who has ever tried uploading to YouTube will know, the first month is the most important for views and new subscribers. Which, needless to say, incentivizes companies like CBS to go around hunting for any reasonably popular review critical of the garbage they put out in the name of entertainment, and file baseless claims to get those videos taken down. As far as I'm aware, there is no countervailing disincentive. Content creators must abide by YouTube's strike rule, though it's worth mentioning that we've never even received a strike. Strikes aren't necessary to get content removed, only claims. But major studios are not, to my knowledge, restrained by an equivalent system. There is no comeuppance for a studio that logs repeated baseless copyright claims. They can just carry on doing it, and each and every time they succeed in their primary endeavor, which is to minimize the spread of content harmful to their brand. I've bitched about all this before, but I thought I'd take a little time out of the beginning of this video to say once again that this system is broken. DMCA and YouTube's Content ID system are nominally in place to protect all content creators, yet YouTube itself does not care that these systems are being abused by major studios, and so harming those same content creators. Content creators without whom, it should be said, YouTube would never have got to where it is today, and without whom it will not remain where it is today. Something is rotten in the state of YouTube. But coming closer to the topic of this video, something is especially rotten at CBS. Of course, there is more that we as creators can do to be careful. There are ever more steps we can take to minimize the odds of them making a claim. Though against this, I'd mention that the content they claimed on part 1 of this critique amounted to 7 seconds, which had been heavily edited, transformed, and deliberately placed to illustrate an important point in that review, namely the different approaches to writing and storytelling used by the Next Generation and Star Trek Discovery. In other words, it met every condition of fair use. We didn't exactly invite their claim, but they didn't need an invitation, which rather begs the question, just how much more can we be expected to do to avoid it? But more importantly, it begs a second question. What the fuck is wrong with the people at CBS? There's a very simple way to avoid negative coverage of your garbage shows, guys. Stop making garbage shows. Put 1/10 of the effort you currently expend trying to wreck people's YouTube channels into writing decent stories, and you will automatically have improved your modern Star Trek productions. Hell, you could stick one diuretic chimp on the writing team of Star Trek Discovery, and that show would be made astronomically better, because there is simply no way said chimp's diarrhea could be any more watery and loose than the writing in Disco. Chimp poo could be the cement that binds all your ideas together. This would be a marked improvement. Anyway, this gripe wouldn't be complete without the positive side, which is, as ever, that we have a great community of people here who support us and remind us that all the work we put in on these videos is still worth it, even if the platform we're creating content for doesn't recognize it. This video will be long enough without me naming all of you, so suffice it to say that if you pop up in our comment section, it's likely you are included in our thanks. Ultimately, we've had just as much fun meeting people under our videos as we had making the videos, so, and not just in this context, thank you again. Now to the critique. My first plan for this introduction was to go through criticism of our first video in this series. Unfortunately, there hasn't actually been very much of it. I could choose to interpret that as evidence of the soundness of my argument, and specifically the introduction to that video, where I sought deliberately to head off the type of response we had to some of our other entries on this topic, that we're all old, straight, white, male, conservative, racist, homophobic, transphobic bigots. Kind of hard to make that point of a channel made by fairly young, not conservative, not racist, crypto fags and a trans person, hey. The more likely explanation, though, is that CBS got to that video before very many people had time to call us old, straight, white, male, conservative, racist, homophobic, transphobic bigots. Of the counter-arguments we did receive, one type pointed out that we didn't have to watch the show, and therefore we shouldn't have bothered criticizing it. A point we can dispense with quickly enough with the words, "This channel reviews stuff," and you kind of have to watch things in order to review them. The slightly more fulsome justification for us wasting our time on Discovery is that the fact Discovery is objectively a waste of time actually matters in and of itself, because this is a Star Trek show we're talking about, not some boilerplate rom-com or action flick. If Star Trek has been turned into a pointless thing, that itself is worth pointing out, because making a pointless Star Trek show is a betrayal of one of the most thoughtful and intellectually stimulating franchises ever to grace the small screen. The second genre of argument was that all art, and so all artistic appreciation, is entirely subjective, so there's no point saying Discovery is bad because,
you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
I am actually considering making use of my bachelor's and master's degrees in philosophy and ethics, and my 2 dissertations on aesthetics, because, let's be honest, in what other scenario would either of these 2 things possibly be useful in a video addressing the question of objectivity in art? I'm aware it's been done before, but given there are so many people out there who are prepared to say that a review is bad because there is no such thing as bad, I don't see any harm in making that case in my own words. But for now, it will suffice to say that people who say all art and all appreciation of art is subjective are objectively wrong. I could give you an example of a story that aims at consistency and to convey a particular message and to entertain and inform the audience, but that objectively fails even by the subjective standards set by its creators. And given this is a critique of Star Trek Discovery, that is what I shall now proceed to do. Part 1 of this critique left off at the close of Season 4, Episode 8. Book and morally dubious character have decided to go and bomb some reason into the Collectors, whose Minecraft Death Star is responsible for tearing apart large parts of the galaxy in a search for boronite, which powers the Collectors' hyperfield shield, behind which they sit beyond the galactic edge. To blow these space bastards up, Book and morally dubious character need a weapon built out of some contrivance crystals, but Jesus placed a tracker on those contrivance crystals, and so she and the Discovery are going to follow and intercept Book and morally dubious character in the hopes of stopping them before they provoke a war with the Collectors. Book and morally dubious character build the weapon, though it'll apparently take 5 or 6 hours to finish cooking, or whatever it is it's supposed to be doing. Morally dubious character does an Ultron, promising that when it's all over,
she'll understand. Once this is over, they'll understand. When they see, they'll understand. I just need a little more time.
Burnham and Book say a tearful goodbye over Skype, and Burnham considers acting in this moment, then quickly and sensibly aborts. Admiral Forgettable gives Burnham permission to follow Book using the Discovery, but President Clinton thinks she's too emotional. Not sure how you'd come to that conclusion, so Admiral Forgettable sends another officer along to make sure Burnham doesn't do a Burnham and disregard all her orders for the billionth time. The officer in question is supposed to be familiar to us, though I actually had to go back to prior seasons to remind myself of her existence. Her name is Naan Bread. The reason Saru can't perform the function she is here to perform is that he is too close to Book, but the show also explains that Narnbread is close to Book and also to Burnham, which is an inconvenience the writers escape by explaining that her species values duty above all. They just follow orders, don't you know? When has that ever gone wrong? Narnbread was in fact one of the original crew and was written out of the show, I assume because she got a better gig, sometime, I think, in season 3, which I'm happy to say I've almost wiped completely from my mind, though some stupid leaves scars. In any case, we get some exposition to explain where she's been since then, running covert ops against the remnants of the Emerald Chain apparently, so she wasn't able to tell anyone about it, except Jesus then says she read the reports, so just how covert were these missions? Saru has been meditatively flirting with the President of Navarre throughout this season, and they recommence in episode 9. Saru is one of the better characters in this show, and the dialogue between these two sometimes isn't cringe, but quite often it is. They agree to a dinner date, but since this is scheduled for after the climactic mission they're going on, in an ordinary show it would portend death. Then again, this is Star Trek Discovery, and rarely do things that should happen, happen. The Discovery mushroom jumps to the broken planet in which Book's ship is hiding, and they concoct a plan to get aboard unseen. They decide to take Gay Doctor along for the mission, because he can, talk at Book, and therefore fix the problem. Now they've tried this before, and it didn't work, which is why they're here now. This show pays lip service to the old Trek ideal that people, even in extremis, can be made to see reason, that the dialectic can win out, that minds can be changed by talking more effectively than they can be changed by violence. But it fails here for a number of reasons. Primarily because the writers aren't able to develop the conversations in such a way as to provide impactful new information that might change minds, where previous attempts at argument were ineffective. Burnham and Book have had a number of these same conversations already since Book and morally dubious character fled the Discovery, yet Book's mind has not been changed. Jesus has made the arguments and presented the available data. These were not persuasive. Their goal here is to try the exact same thing, again, without adding anything new to the conversation. The argument has not developed. None of the information they have materially alters what Book already knows. All that changes in this attempt is that it's Gay Doctor being sent to do the talking, but this, too, has already been done. Gay Doctor, in his bit part role as the ship's psychologist, and my god, can you think of a more heavy-handed, heavy workload job than a psychologist on the Discovery? He had a sit-down conversation with Book where they discussed Book's feelings. The fact Gay Doctor is being sent now to try and talk Book out of blowing up the Collectors is proof that Gay Doctor's prior attempts to talk Book out of it have failed, which not only makes this mission doomed from the off, it also begs the question, why don't they know it's doomed? Why are they trying it again? I know the show has practically forgotten that there is anything Vulcan about Jesus, but as a Vulcan might say, this course of action is illogical. As Einstein said, repeating the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of madness. But the second rule of Discovery is to forget previous events wherever they're inconvenient to the plot. Nobody remembers what the first rule is. They forgot that because it was inconvenient to the plot. The other problem with Disco's discussion dilemma is that it lacks the conviction to see it through. I said a little earlier that old Trek generally espoused the view that people are rational and persuadable, and that dialogue beats fists as a means of persuasion. Discovery does indeed pay lip service to this ideal. This episode is a case in point. But seldom does it follow through. The writers don't trust that fans can be entertained by a verbal debate, and so it consistently finds violence and action a much easier and more effective way to make its point. We'll see it again when this plotline comes to its unsatisfying conclusion later in the show. In fact, we'll see it a little bit later on in this episode. But for now, here is Spock himself explaining the difference in approach between old Trek and new Trek.
Around the third or fourth script that we were shooting, there was a scene where I was supposed to sneak up behind somebody, a villain in this case, and pull my phaser and hit him. My phaser was my gun, right? You got that? hit him on the head with the butt of it to render him unconscious. That's the way it was written in the script. When we approached the scene, I said to the director, this is archaic. This is really Western, you know, to pull a gun and hit a guy on the head from behind. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, this man's an alien. We don't know anything about aliens. We can say anything we want. We can make the audience believe anything we want about an alien. You know, let's use our imaginations. A man could have very special knowledge of the human anatomy that hasn't even been discovered yet, or he may have some special power that only Vulcans have, you see. Mm-hmm. I said, why don't I just apply pressure to a certain area of his neck and shoulder here and pinch a little bit, and he goes unconscious, you see. Well, the director bought it, and that's the way we did it. Producers saw it in the rushes, the dailies, the next day, and said, that's a great idea, let's keep using that. It became kind of a traditional thing, and we had great fun with it. And I avoided what I consider physical violence, cracking people on the head. You know, it was a merciful way of knocking out an enemy.
Of course, you're being violent, you realize. You're only splitting hairs to make your own self feel
but you get some kind of sense of progress, some sense of sophistication, at least, you know. So you're not running around punching people and, you know, chasing and running and hitting and jumping and all of that. They call it action. I don't mind action if it is organic and vital to the script, if it makes some interesting or meaningful statement, used dimensionally, creatively, and with integrity. I say yes, by all means, demonstrate the horror of evil when it really goes to work and show what's going on here. But as a means of relating to people, as a means of solving problems, no.
Violence brought respect. Respect brought peace.
No.
To prove how persuasive a talker Gay Doctor is, the writers manufacture a brief argument between two nameless shuttle pilots, which he defuses with some beige PR speak about shared values. Who are these people, you might well ask? I don't know is the answer. Again, it's something we'll discuss in more detail later, but this is such hackneyed writing that it deserves a brief mention here. The show needed to re-establish Gay Doctor's skill set because it hasn't been on display in an episode for quite some time. So, it manufactures an argument for him to defuse. The argument is between two people you'll have seen quite often on the Discovery's bridge, but who are they? What's their relationship? Where do these contradicting views and ideals and approaches come from? The answer is the writer's black holes. Old Trek certainly had its share of disposable characters, but these were usually nameless crewmates, not the deck crew. Kirk, Spock, Bones, Sulu, Uhura, Picard, Riker, Data, Worf, and all the rest were fully formed characters. Their actions in any given episode were explicable without actually having to explain them in many occasions, because their characters had been carefully built up over the course of preceding episodes, and indeed across entire seasons. Discovery has had 4 seasons now, 1 more than the original series, just 3 fewer than The Next Generation and Voyager, and yet we know next to nothing about anyone on the Discovery's bridge save Jesus and Saru. As a result, it means nothing when 2 nominally important people have a falling out, because they just haven't been important until this point. We know nothing about their characters. Everything about them is invented at a moment's notice in order to make a scene happen. This is cheap, lazy writing. Unfortunately, morally dubious characters somehow had time to install an extensive new security system on Book's ship without Book noticing, despite them cohabiting for however long it's taken them to get here, and one assumes that's very little time given they have the new mushroom drive. And this is just silly. How does one man fit an entirely new defensive array all by himself in so little time on a ship he doesn't know, without the owner of that ship, who's never more than a few feet away from him, noticing? The new defensive system covers the shuttle in something. Book tells morally dubious character to stop it before it kills the crew of the shuttle, but apparently, morally dubious character made the defensive system autonomous. Because where would we get this episode's non-stop peril from without such egregiously implausible stupidity? They could, I suppose, try and get Gay Doctor to talk at the defensive array because that seems to be their approach in this episode, but no, Book fires an EMP which kind of solves the problem, and the Discovery beams the crew back aboard before the shuttle snaps in half. Book's ship then mushroom jumps away, so they now have no choice but to follow it into the anomaly itself, which is peacefully mining other bits of the galaxy into tiny pieces. Naan Bread then drops another hastily manufactured contrivance, a very convenient way to instantly destroy Book's ship using a flaw in its prototype mushroom drive should the worst come to the worst. Once again, this is something that could easily have been trailed when the new drive was first introduced, but it's here been magicked into existence solely to manufacture the stakes of the episode, because writing is hard apparently. Nanbred's presence on this ship is nightmarish, by the way. She's established as a second and at least equivalent, but also sometimes superior authority, acting beneath Jesus except where she arbitrarily decides she has the authority to act above Jesus. No sensible military would disrupt the chain of command in this way. Starfleet is supposed to be a navy, remember? Moreover, it's in every way a more warlike and war-ready navy than previous iterations, given the state of the galaxy as it was set up in Season 3. You'd have expected the chain of command to be more rigid, not less, more formal, not less, more codified, not less. But the writers have to pretend this isn't the case to establish the stakes. Jesus is in charge, except where she isn't, which is when things go wrong as determined by Nanbred, in which case Nanbred's commitment to duty above all will see her usurp Jesus in order to kill Book and destroy the Discovery if needs be to save billions in the galaxy. This is not how navies or writing are supposed to work. Book and morally dubious character have an equivalent conversation, in which morally dubious character explains that Book may have to choose between his feelings and his mission, and this silly man has no idea of this series' meta, does he? The following space battle looks beautiful, by the way, but unfortunately the writers somewhat wreck it because they overplay its premise, which is Book and Jesus' familiarity with each other's tactics. This isn't a bad device by any means, but the show isn't confident the audience can understand it without being slapped repeatedly in the face by it, and so slapped repeatedly in the face we most definitely are. Amusingly, and I'm sorry to say predictably, almost all their history together, the parts that are invoked in this scene, has to be invented in this scene and exposited in dialogue, because despite the show having had a whole season prior to this that it could have worked with, the writers could not find any notable event or indeed many meaningful interactions between its two main characters from that entire season on which they could draw here for reference, which would be a staggering indictment of Season 3, had all the staggering indictments not already been made. And then the production was apparently concerned with the budget because the battle abruptly stops, and they discover the Death Star Minecraft machine's controller. Jesus decides to put the Discovery between Book's ship and the controller. The plan is to stall them long enough for gay scientists to get more data that Jesus intends to use to talk Book down. Again, the hope, as I recall it, is that if they can prove that the anomaly is not an immediate threat to any more systems, Book might relent temporarily to give them time to negotiate with the collectors. And yet, again, we have already established that this information cannot factor into his motivations. His whole driving purpose is not that the Minecraft Death Star shouldn't destroy any more planets for a while, it's that you cannot brook the risk of it ever again destroying a planet. And he doesn't trust the Federation's ability to negotiate with the collectors into giving that undertaking, which is why he's here to begin with. New data showing that the Minecraft Death Star has to recharge before it blows up more planets makes literally no difference to that reasoning. It doesn't, it shouldn't, change Book's drive or desire
in any way.
Another space battle follows in which they fire lots of missiles at each other while Book tries to jump his ship around the Discovery. But it is already quite well established that Book's ship is much more maneuverable than the Discovery without it using the magic mushrooms, so he could have just flied past it normally. Why didn't he do that? Then the decision has to be made, to kill Book or not to kill him. Jesus has a panic attack. But then, gay scientist tells them the Death Star Minecraft machine will be mining here for a full week. Look, we've got that data we wanted after all. But as we've established, this shouldn't make any difference. A week should however be just about enough time for Jesus and Naan Bread to have a long conversation about their feelings.
3 hours later.
And maybe allot a few seconds at the end to try and convince Book to stop once they're done. This cannot work. Jesus takes a shuttle over to Book's ship and parks right next to the window so they can see each other, which is entirely unnecessary because they can Skype and magnify images and such. This scene makes no sense. It looks silly. Jesus' offer is to hold Book and morally dubious character on the Discovery while the Federation tries to negotiate with the Collectors in a bid to convince them to take away their Minecraft Death Star machine. And if negotiations fail, she promises the Federation will back Book's plan to destroy the Death Star. As we've established, this cannot work. So naturally, it does. Book actually agrees. It makes no sense. It didn't work before. None of this new information alters his reasoning. It is utterly inexplicable for the reasons already laid out. He has no reason to trust that they'll let him out of space prison if the terms aren't met, and he's already evinced a strong distrust of the Federation's motives and its desires and its capabilities. But to hell with character consistency, it's gonna work this time. Until, that is, morally dubious character beams the weapon into the controller anyway, based on some cryptic lesson from game theory that just really doesn't make a huge amount of sense in this context. Everyone jumps away, the Minecraft Death Star disintegrates, but morally dubious character is unable to locate the power source he needs to get back to heavily implied boyfriend, and he reasons, tragically, that the power source is on the other side of the wormhole and outside the galaxy, which is a contingency you think he might have considered before. This, however, is partially forgivable. Unusually for this show, morally dubious character is not a terrible, entirely one-dimensional character. He actually has some depth and some complexity, and you can be more charitable in his case than in other examples of character inconsistency, because desperate people are not always consistent. The same point applies to Book, but only to an extent, because it really only goes so far. It can only forgive so much. It's required to forgive far too much, given we understand about Book's own character and motives. Naan Bread and Burnham have another feelings talk. The moral of this episode is that middle grounds are good, despite their attempts at finding a middle ground having just entirely failed. Oh, and Saru asks Gay Doctor's advice on whether, and if so how, to flirt with the President of Navarre. Gay Doctor asks if Saru has feelings for her. It's Star Trek Discovery, of course he has fucking feelings for her. The characters in this show are so full of feelings, they shit love hearts, for fuck's sake. At this point, my stream was making several attempts to kill itself, and I can understand why, but hey, we've just got 3 episodes left. This one closes with the revelation that a second Minecraft Death Star has appeared in the exact same place the last one was destroyed. How titillating. The second Death Star is bigger and more powerful and moving more quickly than the first, which is imaginative, though it rather begs the question, why weren't the Collectors using this one to begin with? Why would the destruction of the first Death Star logically necessitate that you speed up mining operations? What are their motives here? How have we got this far into a show while still knowing absolutely nothing about the nominal villains of the show? I said every character in this show is full of feelings, but this isn't quite true. There is one man so utterly devoid of emotion and personality that I'm surprised he wasn't extracted under the Federation's laws against sentient robots. Episode 10 opens with him telling a meeting of the top brass to expect the unexpected. Apparently, the fact they destroyed the Minecraft machine might make first contact a bit awkward. We didn't need to be told this, it was quite literally the premise of the last couple of episodes, explained over and over and over again. But as I have to keep saying, this is Star Trek Discovery, and it sets the bar for its audience's cognitive abilities so low, James Cameron would have to build a submarine to find it. And we can't have that because we're all waiting with bated breath for Avatar. No, I can't do it. Please, James, just get in the sea. anything to avoid Dances with Smurfs 2, Revenge of the Cockatoo, or whatever the fuck that overhyped monstrosity is going to be called. There are strong Arrival vibes here as they discuss how to communicate with Species 10C, if indeed it is possible to do so at all. Or perhaps Close Encounters vibes if you want a reference to a much superior film, though it does more closely resemble Arrival. And remember that because it becomes very relevant later. Gay scientist summons Jesus, President Clinton, and Admiral Forgettable away to learn that the new Death Star is bigger than the old Death Star. It's decided that they can't afford to wait to start talking about their feelings with Species 10C. President Clinton explicitly says it is too urgent to wait. Then she decides to resign from her position as president to join the mission and transfer power to Vice President who? Tim Kaine? Kamala Harris? Selena Meyer? I don't know. We've never even heard of the Veep before. We never met them. We never will. It's worth remembering this little digression as well, if only because in that manner Discovery excels at, it goes absolutely nowhere, because the writers seem to forget all about it. It doesn't impact the plot in any way. It doesn't even have a bearing on the rest of the episode. It seems to have been an excuse for President Clinton to stress the urgency of the mission. But if the mission were really that urgent, why are we wasting minutes on an irrelevant scene that has around 5 seconds of meaningful dialogue? And why are we setting up some nominally consequential decision that in the event has no consequence at all? President Clinton has been on missions before as president, and it wasn't an issue then. Why is that no longer possible? Oh, of course, it's the second law of Star Trek Discovery again. Forget anything inconvenient to the plot.
Meanwhile, thousands of miles away,
Book and morally dubious character discuss their only semi-successful attempt to blow up the Death Star, and ponder how to get through the Omega Relay into the Collector's space. Apparently, programmable antimatter is the key. It sounds complicated, so no doubt they'll microwave some up in the next 5 minutes, or else, and worse, go on another side quest to pick some up. Remember how President Clinton said it was urgent that they got on with the plot right away? Well, the show forgot that in the very next scene. So far, we've seen President Clinton say she'll resign without actually resigning, Book and morally dubious character accept, you guessed it, another side quest, and now we get Saru trying to say thanks but no thanks to the President of Navarre's offer of a dinner date. To be fair to the show, it's hard, but I shall try. This kind of works. Saru is probably the only character who's emerging from this in a state something other than abysmal, and as has been mentioned previously, the relationship he's building with the President of Navarre is not cringe 100% of the time. The fact that it is only cringe 79% of the time is a marked improvement on the tone of the rest of the show. Then, we are reintroduced to Adira, who is back on the ship, not that we noticed her leave, after disappearing to visit Gray and ask how they is coping. What with them having been written out of the show and all. Once again, this is all a big waste of time. We didn't notice her leave, and her return augurs precisely nothing. She has no integral role in what follows. Her job could be done by one of the many faceless goons Disco summons up when science needs doing. Another sign that the characterization in this show is shallower than... well, you can make your own sex jokes, I'm sure. We're above that on this channel. Honestly. Even the named characters are largely irrelevant to events in the plot anyway, which is never a particularly good sign. And anyway, where is this urgency? I'm not sensing a lot of urgency in this episode. Weren't we told of the utmost urgency of the mission about 5 minutes ago? No, it's longer than that, I just tuned it out. The episode's gone on for... who even knows how long? Because it's so very urgent, which is why there is so much else to do. Then Jesus and President Clinton have a conversation during which Jesus pointedly reminds President Clinton that questioning her orders and introducing doubt amongst the crew really isn't on. And fuck me, but if this doesn't totally contradict the last episode, when naan bread was put on the bridge for exactly that reason and Jesus was fine with it. In return, President Clinton asks Jesus not to mess around with her first contact task force. God, I mean, if I were the collectors, I would not want any kind of engagement with a first contact task force, because could you make it sound more boring? But Jesus agrees anyway, then gives that smile she always gives when she's about to end up breaking all the rules and getting away with it. All this is done to continue Jesus and President Clinton's bizarre ongoing semi-relationship. From the beginning, President Clinton has been portrayed questionably. In the first episode, she is almost set up as a villain, or at least somebody with a dark aspect to her character. The tension between her methods and Jesus's is supposed to mean something. I'm morally certain the idea is to show character development, but ideally, character development is judged against tangible goals and signposts and markers. Development is development because it achieves something, because it is consequential. Those consequences can be measured. The budding, if uneasy, alliance between Jesus and President Clinton barely counts, however, because at no point is it ever tied to something consequential in the plot, or even something particularly consequential about their characters. They distrust each other's methods at the start, they eventually come to accept those methods, but nothing actually results from this development except later in the season, Clinton recognizing that Jesus is actually competent to lead some putative Voyager mission, which is only really inserted by way of a reference, which we all knew would be the realization anyway, because Jesus is Jesus and there is nothing she cannot do. Everyone will like her in the end. Jesus rejects it, of course, as everyone, including President Clinton, knew she would, so what was the point? Finally, quite some considerable time since we were told how urgent this mission is, they finally get under— oh no they don't. No, they don't get underway. Jesus has to give the Sermon on the Mount to her crew. Now ideally, a speech like this is supposed to inspire, to motivate, to be impressive. Rhetoric is an art form, it can be appreciated as such. But Jesus uses this speech to remind everyone of the setup for the episode. It's literally just expositing what we've already seen. And that's it. She repeats the setup, the crew Pikachu, and they go off to do the thing we already knew they were going to do before Jesus reiterated that it is indeed what they have to do. How very inspiring. It reveals so much about Jesus' leadership style and qualities. I'm glad we had this scene, otherwise, actually nothing would have changed. They mushroom jump too far away from their destination for reasons and have to warp the rest of the way. So we detour back to Saru and find that the president of Navarre is aboard now because a delegate didn't arrive in time, a delegate that is of the First Contact Task Force, presumably because they had literally anything more exciting to do than join a task force, and the president of Navarre is, notably, at least as far as I am aware, still president. So maybe presidents don't have to give up their powers to go on missions, which was a rule invented earlier in this same episode, and now forgotten. This goes second law in evidence yet again. Anyhow, things are very awkward between them now. And trust Discovery to dally when the plot needs urgency, and rush whenever it needs to slow down, Saru and Gay Doctor then share some feelings about the awkward relationship Saru is enjoying or not with the president of Navarre.
Meanwhile, thousands of miles away,
Book and MDB are on their side quest looking for some programmable antimatter at an allegedly out-of-commission Emerald Chain work camp where MDB was previously imprisoned. And because the plot is moving with a sense of urgency, we get a flashback to MDB's imprisonment of a length familiar to anyone who suffered through the Book of Boba Fett. He has a chat with a fellow prisoner while lying in bed, and you know he's tired because he has developed a massively over-egged squint.
Meanwhile, thousands of miles away,
The Discovery reaches the Omega Relay. Apparently there's some kind of invisible space cancer on the other side that will ruin their shields. Again. But it's fine because they can just science their way out of this situation in a near record-setting 20 seconds of dialogue. To get through it safely, they must fly into a space testicle. What are these things? Why do they exist? How are they not affected by space cancer? Do they have any basis in science? These are all potentially interesting questions, and some of them actually do need answering in order to justify proceedings. Inventing random space testicles as a means of establishing some kind of plot-relevant difficulty is, after all, another form of contrivance. The short answer to these questions is, don't know, don't know, and no. The slightly longer answer is that the writers do throw in some actual science in explaining that the space testicles are analogous to spatial cells created by vacuum state fluctuations as described by Heisenberg. But the way it's deployed here is as more of this show's trademark technobabble. Throw enough sciencey sounding words in there in quick succession. It really is laughable that they should try to do this in a single short burst of dialogue, and the impression of science has been achieved, whether or not the words actually fit together logically in a sentence or indeed have very much relationship with each other or what's happening on screen. Which is good enough for this show, but not for anything that aspires to the kind of serious science fiction old Trek embodied. Sure, a great deal of science fiction involves certain artistic leaps being made and liberties taken, largely for dramatic effect. But dramatic effect doesn't excuse all leaps and liberties. You can forgive sound in space, for example, though 2001 and to a much lesser extent Ad Astra showed how effective true silence can be, but not the wholesale butchery of the science you are ostensibly relying on and venerating. Gay scientists' hasty invocation of Heisenberg and vacuum state fluctuations, producing something he compares analogously to spatial cells, solely in order to slow the discovery down and allow all these pointless side quests and feelings talks to play out, isn't far above the parody dialogue I wrote in Part 1, featuring Freddie Mercury arrays and Vortian pedo-shield crystals and Viagra miscule whatevers. If I'd prefaced that with the word Einsteinian, it would pretty much match the intellectual level of gay scientists' exposition here and be about as faithful to the science he is supposedly explaining. But because again this mission is so urgent, we then get dragged away twice. First because President Clinton has received a classified message of some sort, and then,
meanwhile, thousands of miles away,
to where MDB has another flashback. MDB's new scientist friend has PTSD. I have PTSD from all these fucking flashbacks. Whoever invented them as a narrative device had no idea the damage he was doing to art in the future. His scientist friend, the one he meets in prison, is previously heavily implied boyfriend, and not sure if still implied boyfriend has devised a way to escape their prison cell by jumping to an alternate dimension into paradise. I don't know, I zoned out to my own alternate dimension during this flashback, where Star Trek Discovery doesn't exist, and everything is lovely. Paradise is the semi-mythical place he references, and it really is all a little bit odd. These scenes are an attempt to retrofit MDB with the tragic motivations that have hitherto been mostly implied. But this stuff, which primes the motives of a hinged character in the series, is only now being introduced 10 episodes into a 13-episode season. MDB suffers from this late introduction, because you can't simultaneously imbue the audience with a sense of urgency, while also taking time away to equip a brand new character with meaningful emotions and feelings and plotlines. These flashbacks take far too long and they provide far too little. Giving credit where it's due, there are the germs of something good in all this, but their placing is entirely wrong. It makes them simultaneously too long and too short. It's impossible to get all we need from this backstory while also keeping the main plot moving, hence the invention of the space testicle contrivance. As is Discovery's way, these flashbacks are concerned with explaining feelings and not at all with making the plot logical. Possibly still implied boyfriend has managed to create from scratch an astoundingly powerful device that can send the user to alternate dimensions, all under the apparently not that watchful eye of the Emerald Chain. He and MDB put the finishing touches on it, and MDB agrees to go through it with possible boyfriend and into paradise, despite him knowing very little about it and having no clearly established reason to want to leave his own dimension. Sure, he wants to escape captivity, but there must be easier and less drastic ways to do so than building a machine that warps you to a whole new dimension, to a destination he has only a vague, allegorical knowledge of. Besides being impractical, it's an unjustifiably extreme means of escape when, as we will shortly see, it's actually very easy to overpower the guards and get out by conventional means. Back on the Discovery, it turns out the classified message President Clinton received explains that there is some sort of gravitational wave being unleashed, presumably by the Collector's second Death Star, which will send debris hurtling toward Earth and Nefar in a very short time. The second Death Star has, out of an entire galaxy to pick from, arrived in the Alpha Quadrant, but it has not been established that this, at the moment, non-entity entity is actually being directed against the Alpha Quadrant or the people who destroyed the first one. It is not established that the collectors know how the first one was destroyed or by whom. Nothing has yet been suggested to tell us that the second Death Star is anything other than a mining implement of the same type as the first one. It is explicitly mentioned that it is still mining things. So it's very, very convenient for the plot that it just happens to have picked the Alpha Quadrant in which to emerge, because without it doing that, where's the threat? Where are the stakes? There is no peril. How very, very lucky. Good job they've been so urgent on their mission, isn't it? Good job they haven't faffed about for practically the whole fucking episode. They have to do more on-the-spot science nonsense to jump between the space testicles. The writers have the cheek to suggest that this is to speed up their journey, when in fact, the purpose is to slow things down. They've given themselves a terribly convenient way to only have the discovery move forward when they need the plot to move forward, while having it remain in place whenever they decide they have more backstory to fill. And true to form, we're straight back off to wherever the fuck and another flashback, and then MDC and Book find some of the antimatter they need in MDB's old cell. Why didn't the Emerald Chain search it? There's an escape attempt. The Emerald Chain know they were building something. They must have got the materials from somewhere. Why would you not search that cell after foiling the escape attempt? Or in this case, after the escape attempt is partially successful? Isn't this all, again, very, very convenient? In the flashback, MDC and kind of not sure if any more implied boyfriend try to do the time warp again, but it doesn't work and they get discovered and beaten up by the Emerald Chain. But there is only one guard, and MDB disarms and shoots him. With relative ease, it must be said. They take Watto's slave implants out of their necks, which apparently they hadn't thought or bothered to do before this point, but kind of maybe still implied boyfriend is now too injured to go on and tells MDC to save himself, which he does. He promises to go back once maybe still implied boyfriend has fixed up the time warp machine, but when he goes back, maybe boyfriend has disappeared. All this, once again, is nominally to lay all MDC's cards on the table so we properly understand his motivations. The problem is, it doesn't actually add anything to his character besides what we already knew, apart from maybe some colour. This would have been acceptable, it might even have been good, in an earlier episode where the plot doesn't need as much speed as this episode really requires to maintain the sense of urgency it told us exists. But here it detracts significantly, again, from the supposed urgency of the mission that's supposed to be the point of the damn episode. In fact, the main plot of this episode takes up less time than the flashbacks, and then the cutaways to feelings talk, which is what we get then between Gay Scientist and Adira. The show is kind of playing up the gay parenthood thing. Scratch that, it's massively playing up the gay parenthood thing. And once again, this is something that could have been good. But this is Discovery, and so it's overwrought and overly sincere and overly earnest in its sweetness and simultaneously shallow, and you end up gagging. The writers have to make up for the fact that Gay Doctor and Gay Scientist have had little by way of meaningful development since Season 2. I've complained in previous videos that once they exhausted Brian Fuller's material, these characters are mostly just here to tick boxes, not because they particularly deserve to be. As mentioned in Part 1, Adira and Gray had considerable potential, but the writers weren't sufficiently interested to make use of it, any of it, instead writing Gray out of the show. As likewise mentioned in Part 1, the whole gay thing is something Trek has overlooked until now, so there was ample opportunity to address a lot in this show, from trans relationships to gay parenthood. You can do that tastefully and sensitively, or you can do it tastelessly and play up to the worst stereotypes available, or you can do what Discovery does and just not really do it. I'd say that's a shame, but it might actually be a blessing. I'm not sure I could cope with a genuine attempt by these writers to do any of it justice. Jesus and President Clinton then share a moment of their own, talking about the latest against-the-clock threat facing galactic civilization. The lesson of this exchange is that President Clinton should have shared her feelings about the situation before now, I mean, I'm not surprised that this is the conclusion, but what a conclusion. It concludes nothing. What relevance do her feelings have to the galactic threat facing civilization? Book and MDC then have their own scene where they share their feelings. And then the Discovery finally exits the Milky Way, and President Clinton gives a speech where she tells the crew that the second Death Star is now moving toward Navarre and Earth. Oddly, the show decides we don't actually need to hear what she's saying. We just need to see various crew members Pikachooing. Again. Surely this was supposed to be more than we were given. This, of all the speeches given, is the most impactful one, surely, or at least it should have been. This is the opportunity to do so much character development, to redeem the cynical President Clinton in the eyes of fans who might still doubt her motives, to establish what those motives are, to make it abundantly clear, undeniably clear, that her heart and her brain are in the right place. She is fully invested in the fight against the galactic threat, to give her something warm and admirable. But they cut away from her mid-sentence.
To the many on board, with family, friends, and colleagues now under direct threat, I too feel your pain in this moment.
What are you doing, show? We get a final talk between Jesus and President Clinton where they share more feelings, and Jesus explains that the reason she wanted President Clinton to deliver the bad news to the crew is that the people need to see that their leaders aren't rattled. Now, I admit it's possible that I've missed something, but wasn't President Clinton supposed to be giving up her job to go on this mission? So, their leaders, she's not a leader. Why are you telling someone who's just given up being a leader that they should speak to the crew so that the crew can see their leaders aren't rattled, unless President Clinton hasn't in fact resigned her position? And to the best of my recollection, no further comment has been made in this regard. She hasn't actually done it. Does it happen later? Spoiler, no. It's yet another idea picked up, foisted onto the screen, and then completely discarded. But at least the galaxy doesn't have to suffer under someone so incompetent and devoid of personality that they were only fit to be vice president of this federation. Anyway, that brings us to the end of episode 10, and so to the end of part 2 of our critique. As mentioned, or threatened in part 1, I've taken a different approach here, focusing much more on character and plot than on Discovery's themes and ideas, or whatever it is that passes for themes and ideas in this show. We've done a few videos now looking at the broader issues surrounding disco, messaging, intent, and purpose, but I thought it was important we lay down what makes the show objectively bad from a writing standpoint as well, since critiquing its messaging and its ideals always leaves you open to the kind of low-effort response that dismisses all your criticisms on the grounds you just don't like a show's politics. Which I don't. But the point of this video has been to show that that is beside the point. Discovery is bad on every level, from the macro to the micro, and is bad regardless of whether the viewer agrees or not with what it is trying to say. I should be able to condense the final 3 episodes into a single installment, and in that case, part 3 will round off this sorry affair. As before, the script is mostly done and I have all of the footage, so I hope it'll take about as long to produce as this one did. If so, it will go up in 2 weeks from today. The aim for that video will be to combine the 2 approaches adopted so far, critiquing the plot and the writing as well as the show's injection of politics into both. As before, my aim is to accomplish the latter without merely countering politics with politics. A section of that video is already online, dealing with the inclusion of Stacey Abrams as President of Earth. They actually did it. As President of Earth. So if you want a foretaste of the approach I'll be using, head on over there. Link in the description. In the meantime, it behoves me to thank you once again for your attention and for your support of this channel. As mentioned at the close of part 1, we are still relatively new to all this, and this is only the second Longman audition I have done. So of course there'll be things I could have done and still could do better, and if you're kind enough to point them out to me, I'll be diligent enough to at least try to incorporate them in part 3. Speaking of support, I'd like to reiterate that we really are incredibly grateful to have so much of it from you. If when we started our channel 4 odd months ago you told us we'd be where we are today, we'd likely not have believed you. Your comments and your broader engagement with these videos and the channel as a whole is a large part of what makes it fun, even when faceless megacorporations are intent on making the whole thing as frustrating as possible. I'm not a salesman, and I hate doing pitches. I don't want this to seem as though it detracts from the real value you add to this channel, which is in the thoughts and opinions you're kind enough to share with us, but we do now have a Patreon, and if you are in the enviable position of having pennies to throw at anyone who doesn't run a gas station or an electricity company, any and all support there is likewise welcome. Our short-term ambition for these videos is to have them pay for the whiskey we drink while writing them, which would at least make us more profitable than Karl Marx and without the concomitant perpetually and murderously misapplied social philosophy. We're working on what we can do to actually reward patrons over there, and at this point I wouldn't want to pitch this as much more than a way of donating to what we do here. But the very least we can do for now is to personally thank those who have signed up, and to that end I would like to extend our wholehearted appreciation both to John Cole and to Jenny Media. The extraordinary thing is that only one of them is related to me. Link for all that is in the description as well. But that is quite enough rambling from me. Our thanks again for all you do. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Au revoir, but not goodbye.